So in the last video, part 2, I showed where I was strengthening up the supports for the boards that I was using as cross members underneath the deck. I did use a putty on one, gave it a shot. It kind of cracked a little bit, so what I wound up doing is going ahead and adding fiberglass cloth in to all the boards so I could see how many layers of fiberglass cloth it was going to take up the gap. Okay, so what I did after that was I pulled all those out and then resined all of them down, so it's all fiberglassed in. Well, I knew there would be a little shrinkage because the resin makes the fiberglass compress down. It's not all fluffy, and the gap between the fiberglass support and the board, I just filled that right in with putty and just gave everything one good coat of resin, and it was solid. Once I got all the deck boards finished and everything was solid, I started working on the deck board. I first measured from the transom forward on each side of the boat, taking measurements to where my board would start, which was 23 inches from the transom on each side. Then I went from there 10 inches and measured the width of the boat and marked each measurement down 10, 20, 30 inches from the transom, and marked down the width at that point and made sure I was at 30 inches on each side or 40 inches on each side of the boat. The first cut I made was the length of the board, what it needed to be to fit that area on the boat deck. I put on a rip fence with a straight board, so when I run the saw down the cut line, it would be nice and straight. Once I had my board length cut, I went back to my measurements and found the widest point in the measurements and cut the board to that width. Once again, I set up my board so I'd have a rip fence and have a nice straight cut. Okay, so hopefully you can see this. Now, the length of my board for the deck needed to be 68¼ inches long. Okay, so I cut that. And the width of the board originally was 48 5/16. So I cut it down to 48 inches wide because my widest point is 48 inches. All the other measurements are smaller. So to find my sides on each side, the left and the right, I take the width of the boat where the deck needs to be, cut at 47½. So 23 inches from the stern needs to be 47½ inches wide. Okay, that divided by 2 is 23¾ inches. So I keep doing that all through every one of these numbers. And you're going to get to some point to where you're going to have a tough one, 47 7/8. So you need to find the decimal equivalent to 7/8. Now here's a chart you can get off the internet. It's fractions, decimals, and millimeters. Pretty cool. So we look up 7/8. Okay, so 7/8 is over here. So 7/8 is 0.875. You can see one of our measurements is 0.875, so you can make a little note out there. That is 23 7/8. So now that I have all my fraction marked out on what I need to cut, make it a lot easier to measure it for the cut. So what we're going to do, and the reason we divided by 2, because our width is 48, it's easier to work with 24. So you can find your center line is 24 inches. Once you mark your center line, you just go this way that distance. So 24, I won't have to cut in that at 40. At 50, I'll have to cut 23 and 15/16 from the center line this way and from the center line the other way. So my cuts will be even down each side. It'll be center cut. Center measured and cut on the edges the same on both sides. And that's how you do that. So what I do is I take my ruler and I put it on 23 3/4. That's my first cut at the end of the board. Needs to be that width, 23 3/4. So I set the ruler on 23 3/4 and then measure. That's where I need to cut in this area. And the same thing on the other side is going to be, drop the ruler. I dropped the baby, I don't know why. Remember that one? Alright, 23 3/4, and I've got my mark down there on that side. So it's going to be even. I keep doing that the same way on both sides from the center line. Okay, so I did my measurements from the center down each side, and you can see how the line takes on a sort of curve of its own, and it's nothing that can't be sanded out. But that's your definite edge of your measurements. And every time I do it this way, I find that I don't have very much putty to use to fill the sides. It's going to be pretty close. So I can lay some putty underneath, put the board down, smash it in, and then lay off the sides so I can take my glass 4 inches from this side up and right up the side 4 inches and give me 8-inch sides of glass. So once I got the deck board all cut, I put it in place just to check the fit, and fit perfect. So I backed that board up to expose the deck support wood that I ran across the bottom. It was lined up in the front, lined up in the back, and I marked the center of those boards on the deck board. And I did that for both sides of the deck board. Once I had the deck support board centers marked onto the deck board, when I put it in place and got ready to screw it down, I just laid a 48-inch ruler across each mark, and I knew where the center of the deck support boards were and just screwed it down. Okay, so I basically just took the putty and went down the sides and put it on my, if you want to call them stringers. I just took my ruler, laid it across, and drilled it down, and just kind of puttied it in. Once that sets up, I'll come back and do the sides, round it so I can lay fiberglass on it and run it up to 2 inches on the sides. Now, one thing I want to point out is this section here, before I put those boards in, spacers for the bench, I gave that a coat of resin, and I ran up each side quite a ways. That's all been sanded real good before I put the resin on, and I brushed it on. Brush that stuff into those grooves that the sandpaper leaves. That's what's gonna make it stick. The worst thing in the world is having fiberglass come loose from fiberglass. It's just nonsense. I mean, you can roll it, but you have to press it into those grooves, and the best way I found is to brush it in, really get it into those grooves that the sandpaper leaves. That's the reason we sand, so it'll have something to stick to. Same thing in painting. See? So use a brush whenever you can. You're always going to be able to come back and give it a finished sanding once you start rolling it. But there's no sense in blowing through rollers just to be rolling. Brush it on. Now these are the brushes I'm using. And you definitely want something that's going to be like China bristle. I don't know what this is. Horsehair or something. But see, it's still usable. I've used this one about, I don't know, 4 or 5 times. You just have to clean it up, and it doesn't take much to clean it up. Maybe an ounce or 2. And this is what you want to use to clean that brush. 100% pure acetone. And like I said, you get you a little plastic cup, pour about an ounce of that in there, get your brush going, kind of work it back and forth, rub it up the sides, wash your cup out if you want, dump that out, 1 ounce, dump another ounce into your cup, rinse it again, do your sides, whatever, if you're going to save the cup. But that's usually all it takes, is about 2 ounces. And I can keep on using this brush. Friggin' $1.89, $1, something like that. $1.30, I don't know. But they're cheap. But you can reuse them. It's just an ounce of acetone and rinse it twice. And that's, see? Still usable. I'm good. If fiberglass gets in here, or resin gets in there, no worry, it'll just hold your bristles in. No biggie.